Hello, welcome to our one-on-one conversation with Casey Jones, author and screenwriter. We had a little bit of technical difficulties with this one, so the beginning was cut short. Zoom was not cooperating. So let me try to catch you guys up. First of all, let me introduce Casey. After graduating from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, with a degree in film production, Casey Jones returned to the Pacific Northwest to focus on a career in screenwriting. He was a three-time Script Pipeline screenwriting finalist and won the 2013 pitch contest before ultimately making the leap to novels. When not writing, he can usually be found cooking, playing video and board games, or exploring the local wilderness with his wife. Black Tide was his debut novel based on the 2019 screenplay. So in the beginning, what we missed recording was simply Casey talking about how he decided to venture into the novel world and out of the screenwriting world. And Black Tide was adapted from a screenplay, but it was not his first adaptation. First, he did a much more robust novel about this world, a much more complicated kind of fantasy world, and then decided to, during a NaNoWriMo, which, by the way, pause for a second, NaNoWriMo is National Novel Writing Month. It's in the month of November, where there's a challenge that many writers do across the world to write 50,000 words in a single month. So that's where Casey decided to start the adaptation from screenplay to book of Black Tide. And then he took it from there and went on and rewrote. So now I will leave you and we'll go right into our conversation in progress. Enjoy. So now we're at you have your literary agent for your book. So can you give people advice and maybe some thoughts about what it's like working with a literary agent as your partner, and maybe some things that were different than working with your screenwriting reps, or some things that surprised you about working with an agent, or things that you really maybe wish you knew ahead of time and been like, oh, I probably would have maybe approached that conversation differently.
I think it's really important to find a rep who is as passionate about your story as you are. I don't mean to sound like I'm slamming them at all, but some of my Hollywood reps, we just never felt like we were really on the same page. Like I would write a script and they might like it, they might not. If they did like it, they kind of, I don't know if I want to say they were hesitant to do much with it. I don't know, it was complicated. We just didn't really mesh. And the experience I've had with my literary agent has been the exact opposite. And I was really surprised by how much input she's given for the rewriting process. You know, like with the screenplays, I would get a little bit of feedback from my managers, and then it would go off, and then you'd expect the big feedback to come from directors, producers, everything down the line. But with my literary agent, it was all right up front. Like, let's just get this in this really good spot before we take it out. And then again, we'll have editors and whatnot down the road. But it's just been more personal. It's been more like having a writing partner almost. And so that's taken me by surprise, just how friendly the industry is, at least my experience with it.
And maybe it's the friendly compared to the screenwriting industry. I don't think the screenwriting industry is unfriendly. It's just different, you know. Yeah, it's just different. And part of why it's different is they're spending millions of dollars,
right,
to take a script from the page to the screen, as opposed to in the publishing industry. It's certainly, you know, it's not, it costs a publisher money, but dwarfs in comparison to what it costs to create a movie. And I think that's part of why it's harder to get a script sold.
Well, that's why they're not so eager to jump on and develop something. It's like, we could spend all this time, you know, working on this, or we just get you onto the next thing that we know is going to have more of a shot. And that was, it always came off to me, being at the time young and not having much experience. It was just kind of cold, and as I said, it felt unfriendly and like more business than I was prepared for. And
Yeah.
so I think that was probably the headbutting was more on my end than anything, just because I didn't really know what to expect.
Yeah. So like, okay, so now you got your agent and then they put your work out for submission and you try to match up with a publisher and your editor is in there as well, right? So tips for working with an editor and getting feedback and notes.
Well, I had rewritten Black Tide so many times that by the time the publisher picked it up, the editor said it was in pretty good shape. Her notes were quite broad. I didn't have a lot to do. I got very lucky with Black Tide. It kind of just worked out really well. We sold it in May 2020. So it was kind of a joke that we were selling an end of the world book at the end of the world. So yeah, everything kind of worked out with that. But I just think you have to not take anything too terribly personally when you get their notes. With my editor, she was really open to feedback on the feedback. So it's like this is what I felt reading this and how I think it's going to play out. If you disagree, let me know and we'll talk that out.
Mm-hmm.
And just being able to get on board and talk through things like that was really nice. And I think that's kind of an important relationship to establish, not one that's combative, but that's really collaborative.
Yeah. I mean, and I would also guess, not ever watching you write we're not longtime friends. I've just met you, but I would guess that the reason the editor didn't have a lot of notes, because you seem like the kind of person who really beat the story out. Like you really, spent a lot of time thinking about the details and all of that. I mean, I think, is that one of the things you mentioned, in terms of writing novels, like being able to do that, crawl in their head, I mean, that first time you did that first time you wrote a scene where you're like, oh my God, I can talk about what they're thinking,
Yeah.
I bet you walked up, what did you say to your wife? Oh my God, you're never going to believe it.
With the publishing announcement?
No, with just writing the novel, realizing you can crawl in their head.
Oh, well, I mean,
break all these screenwriting rules.
I wrote that a chapter at a time and emailed them to her. Every time I finished a chapter, I would send it to her so she could read it. And it took me like a year to write it. So she just got these little pieces of a novel, like a newsletter over the course of a year. But I was so excited. And she was happy because I finally was excited to be writing again, coming off of that very low point in screenwriting.
Yeah. I mean, which I think is not an uncommon thing when in any genre. Like, so you said the first book was urban fantasy. So talk about choosing genres to write in the novel world and what why you landed where you landed with Black Tide, and are you going to continue along in that genre?
I've just always really enjoyed horror and terror as a genre. So Steve, more
He's like
Stephen
such a nice
King, less,
guy.
more Stephen King, less just blood everywhere. But one of the first adult books I read was The Shining. I had heard from my mom that my dad read it and it scared him so bad he couldn't sleep, and I was like, oh, well, I should try to read that. And I just loved it. I loved every single thing about it. I loved the supernatural, the way it just seeped in and took over the story, and decided, I'm going to try to write scary stories. It's fun. When I was a kid, I was afraid of everything. And I think it was almost kind of cathartic to have a medium in which I could attack that stuff. So yeah, I would say horror going forward is something I would really love to stick with.
Yeah. I mean, and when you watched the Shining movie, like how old were you when you read The Shining?
8th grade, I think. It was a while ago.
Tell your parents that you read it, or did
My mom thought it was funny. They were always encouraging me to do that kind of thing. I was lucky in that regard.
That is good. And so when you watched the movie, were you did it match like what you thought? Like,
didn't love the movie. I
Yeah.
love Dr. Sleep though. The way that he managed to reconcile the differences between the Shining book and the Shining movie in that, I just thought was phenomenal. So I actually like Dr. Sleep better than I did the book.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. I'll have to go back and read the book. I've never read the book.
Oh, you haven't?
No, I'm
Have
gonna
you
have
seen the movie?
yeah. No,
Okay, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely
Okay,
do it. The comparisons are wild.
cool. Definitely will do that. Uh, so, I think we kind of already addressed this. Christina was asking, did you use a separate agent or literary manager to segue between the two mediums? I mean, they are completely separate reps for each
Yeah, that's right.
thing. Um, uh, when you got the manager for the screenplay, was that through the contest?
It kind of was. I was sort of able to use black tide as clout when querying, but
Mm-hmm.
after placing in the 2009 contest, I got quite a few responses from literary managers and developed short-term relations with them. Just like, okay, this is great. We don't know if we can sell this because it's kind of not based on anything, and this kind of story would really benefit from having an IP backing it up. So, what do you have next? Which became the question that I hated more than anything in the world because like I said, I'm not just a slow writer, I'm a slow idea developer as well. So I didn't always have a what's next. Um, but I just started pitching or querying management companies, just cold queries, who's searching, what do they look
Yeah.
for? And I was able to say, oh, I was a finalist in this contest. That just sort of helps narrow it down for them. Like if you're getting 1,000 queries in, just anything you can see to sort of separate things.
Yeah.
That's the leg up it gave me.
So when talking about ideas, which we could talk about all day. So I've always maintained that it's really, for me, it helps me to like say things out loud. So like I, one of my former writing partners is like somebody I brainstorm ideas with. He's like also my brainstorming partner. That stuff that has nothing to do with anything we would write together, but just stuff. So is your wife like your brainstorming partner, or do you have another friend who's a writer who you run ideas by? Is his name Matt Misitich?
I'm very guarded when I don't have a story completely finished or an idea completely finished because, and I love it, but people always, their first response is to sort of, well, here's my take on it. And
Mm.
like, until I have it figured out myself, I don't want those other takes, which is not necessarily a healthy way of doing it because sometimes I work myself into corners where I really could have used those things early on. But after my first drafts, yeah, I have a very good friend who I met in film school. I send everything to him, and he's a very harsh critic, and he knows his business well. And I send it to my wife, who holds no punches. I wrote a screenplay in 2011, and she read it, and she thought about it for a second. She said, It doesn't feel like you're enjoying this anymore." I was like, "Oh, okay," which might have been about the time that I started thinking about writing a book,
Yeah.
something to put that spark back because she was right. It was a lifeless screenplay, and it's
Yep.
because I was just frustrated and trying too hard to come up with something.
Yeah. I think that happens a lot. Like, that whole, people are all into the whole like Marie Kondo cleansing of your home and picking up everything and say, does this bring me joy? I mean, I think at some point a writer has to ask that same question about the work that they're doing. Like, is this script or is this novel bringing me joy? And if it's just like a dread every time you have to sit down, and especially in the rewrite process, I mean, you're probably not bringing your A game.
Yeah, yeah.
We're just going to do that about everything in life. Is this conversation bringing you joy? No, bye. No,
It is though.
yeah, I mean, there's so much to being a writer. Like, what has surprised you about your routine as a novelist as compared to your routine as a screenwriter?
Boy, what has surprised me? Hmm. I think
Nothing.
maybe just getting the words out that were required for an album. I mean, 50,000 words is a lot compared to a screenplay. And I said I'm a slow writer, but I feel like I was always able to write screenplays fast. Like I didn't stop and question myself a lot. I was able to just sit down and fade in and then get to the end, like, okay, I got that out. Now I can start the rewriting process. Whereas with a novel, I tend to rewrite a lot more as I go. So, get a chunk of words done, call it a day, start the next day by going over those with sort of fresh eyes, and then spending way too much time perfecting them before going on. But yeah, just how much work I put into it as I go versus how I used to just be willing to close my eyes and hit the gas with screenplays has been a shocker, a learning experience.
Do you think part of that is because a script, you've got that limited number of pages, but with a novel, you can dive a little deeper?
And with screenplays, I can get to the stuff I like fast, which is dialogue. And with novels, I have to get through everything else to get to the dialogue parts. And that's sort of not as much fun for me. Not always. Sometimes it's a lot of fun, but it's taxing, more taxing than a screenplay.
So if you had to, Deborah was asking, is it easier for you to write a screenplay or a novel? Or is it just completely different?
I think it's completely different. I have 2 screenplays with directors attached right now, and they keep kind of dragging me back into it for rewrites. I say dragging. I mean, I do enjoy it once I sit down and start working on it again, but it's a completely different set of muscles, of mental muscles to get worked out.
Yeah. And do you find though, I mean, you said before, like when I asked, like what would be your dream writing scenario, would be writing novels. Do you think you'll ever let go of screenwriting, or would you always be open to it?
I would probably always be open to it, but I doubt I'll write any more spec scripts as it stands. I think I've kind of put that behind me since I have sort of a beginnings of a career in novels. It feels more worth my time to just pursue that and not worry so much about the screenplay side. I do have some older scripts that I still love that I wouldn't say no to digging up and polishing and updating for the future. But for new stories, I think I'm just going to stick with books.
So, but one thing I always thought about with scripts is that they do kind of make great outlines for a book, and they're faster to write than a book. So, I mean, have you ever thought about just writing a screenplay, like writing first of all, okay, do you outline your books? I know you know the beginning and the end, but do you do any kind of outlining in between?
It kind of depends on the book. With Black Tide as a book, I just plugged the screenplay in, but I didn't really think about anything else, and I just kind of filled in the blanks as I went. With the book that I'm writing right now, that I can't say too much about, I've had to spend a lot more time outlining and figuring things out because I just had a very basic kernel of an idea when I started with it. But I have written treatments for myself in screenplay form. So okay, I can get all this dialogue out, and that will kind of form the backbone of a scene. And then I'll just put, just sort of some action lines of what happens in there to fill in later. So that's kind of, if I do have to do official outlining, it then definitely revolves around the dialogue.
Yeah. So it is kind of like you're going back to those screenwriting roots, to help you with that foundation of the scripts. So like, did you think that this was how your writing career was going to be? Like, and you set out to be a screenwriter, and you changed and morphed into novel writing. And I think that's awesome. What are your thoughts about just writers writing in different mediums and pivoting, either back and forth, or just saying, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to do novel writing, or or there might be a novelist out there listening to this who's like, you know what, I think I want to try screenwriting.
I think it's great to do because it just gives you more avenues to explore. And it gives you something to, if you want to do both of them, it gives you something to volley back and forth between when you're at a low point. I thought for sure I was going to do screenwriting. Graduated from film school and immediately said, all right, here's how we're going to do it. And I had my business plan all in my head, and I bought all the how to write screenplay books. It never occurred to me that I would eventually dump that for novels. But the fact that I can and I, anybody can, but the fact that option was there and I recognized it, it was nice, because if I didn't have that and I just had to keep trying with screenplays and beating my head against that wall, I think the burnout would have been, it would have been the end of I would have given up probably and just tried something else completely. And I think that's okay too. If you decide in the end that this just isn't, it's not fun, I don't really enjoy this process, I think it's okay to give yourself that out as well.
Mm. You know, one thing that people don't talk about a lot, like they'll think, oh, you got a novel published. Now you can quit your job.
Yeah.
I mean, I think people aren't necessarily, even same thing with a script sold, and people will sell a script for, 7 figures and think, oh, I can quit my job. But the way the payout works, it's not like you get all that money. People are getting chunks of it along the way, and you get paid a certain amount, and sometimes you don't get paid the whole thing. So like, what about that concept of juggling a job, a family, and your writing?
I have absolute respect for people who can juggle all of those things. I'm really fortunate in that when I started this, my wife and I came to an agreement that I would stay at home and do all the house related things, hence the cooking that I got into, and then work on trying to get this writing thing launched. And it took a very long time, and there were some very tense discussions around it. I early on did a lot of gig work as a PA up in Portland when anything would come through town, just kind of, whatever I could. But for me, I really thrive being able to just focus and zero in on the writing and not have to worry about as much other stuff. So if you're doing them all, I can see how it would be very exhausting. And it's amazing that you can get those words in. I have friends who work full time and then come home at night and carve out a big chunk of hours for writing, and it's just incredible.
It is. There's people, crazy people who get up at like 5 a.m. Like, I can't.
I'm a morning writer for sure.
Are you?
Oh yeah.
There's another writer I know, Jonathan Mayberry, who's New York Times bestselling. He actually had a show, one of his series got picked up by Netflix. But he and his wife had that same agreement where I think she gave him 5 years. She said, I will support us. You've got 5 years to do this. And he did it. And, but it's a unique situation, and it's, she sounds lovely.
It can also be kind of a trap if you're not careful, because over the years, I find that I've sort of withdrawn. When you don't have the thing that you have to go out and do, you just sort of start to detach from the world, which we know for writers isn't a good thing. You always are looking for inspiration in other people and other experiences. So you have to try to force those out if you're just going to focus on writing only. So in a way, maintaining a life outside of your writing program is probably beneficial.
Yeah, that is a very good point. So I want to just reach out. Oh, Deborah was asking about facing rejection, and how you handle it. And as your career has grown, has the way you deal with rejection changed?
It's always stung. I would say early on was worse. I would get really bitter. Oh, they just don't know anything, blah, blah, blah. Someday I'm going to print out all my rejection letters after I get the big yes. And as time has gone on, I've come to understand that it's very subjective. And one thing I do is I like to go on to Goodreads or Rotten Tomatoes and find books and movies that I love and read the horrible reviews. And it's like, yeah, see, I mean, and I don't even completely disagree always with their take, because I can see where they're coming from, and it really just illuminates how people respond differently to these things, and that makes it easier. It always hurts though. I always kind of feel sick and I mope around for a day before I pick myself up again.
But I think that's kind of part of the process. Like, I'm a moper. Like, I'll mope for a day, I'll cry, and then okay, maybe do a couple shots of wild turkey, but then it's like, I think that's normal. It's like you're taking the impact of it. and then your mind kind of processes it, and then you make a plan,
Yeah.
and but I think it's probably not healthy to just be like, oh, whatever, no big deal. Like, I think it's good to feel it.
Yeah. Yeah. You get in there and get your knuckles bloody, I guess, in a way, because one other bad habit, I'm going to try something here. Oh, there we go. One other bad habit that I have come up with is avoidance. It's like, well, if I don't send them anything, then I won't get the rejection, which
Mhm.
has bit me a few times, where I've spent months and months and months on something and then finally sent it when it's completely done. Like, oh, what were you thinking? You should have let us say no before you spent all this time on it. So, developing those calluses is a good thing as well.
Yeah. And I also think there's people out there who don't submit their stuff because they're actually afraid of success.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and so there's people, I know someone who's like that, who amazing writer, but does not put the work out because I think it's easier to say, well, it didn't work out because I didn't try, not because it wasn't good,
Success changes a lot of things. I mean, you have to, you get into a routine, and now you've got a lot of other people that you're working with to get something done, and it shifts everything around, and that's scary too.
Mhm.
I had a call with an agent once after the TV series project for the pipeline, that Pipeline supported came out. And he was pitching me all these ideas. He's like, oh yeah, we've got these things and these things and these things. And I just was kind of like, yeah, it sounds great. If I say yes and get excited about those, then I won't be able to work on all these little projects of mine. So I guess in a way, I kind of was afraid of that success way back then, and just sort of, let it go away, because then it wouldn't require the change.
Yeah. Yeah. Change is hard.
It is.
It's really hard, but that's part of why I love that you change from screenwriting to novel writing, because it's also figuring out sometimes change is important. You just pivot. Like I've said before, maybe even on a symposium class, like, when I was training in karate, if you couldn't take somebody down one way, you turn the other way and take them down. Like you have to always be able to just, I really want a career and write as a writer, and you figured out a way to make that happen, which is really cool. There's a couple other questions I want to get in here. I know we started a little late, so we're going to run over a little bit, to make sure we get a full hour in here. Jeff says over in the chat box, he said another track a writer can take when writing their novel is to work with a freelance editor before even having to find an agent. Did you do this? And sounds like you did not, but if not, are you familiar with other writers that may have done this?
I don't know anybody personally who has done it, but I kind of took the crowdsourcing route, and posted my first novel, and then my NaNoWriMo draft of Black Tide I posted on Wattpad. Are you familiar with that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, it was sort of passive aggressive and maybe slightly avoiding the rejection that would come from traditional querying. I was like, if I post these on here and people can just publicly read it, and I get all kinds of feedback from lots of different perspectives, and I actually that worked.
Interesting.
Yeah, I got lots of responses on things that right at the beginning of the books that were not working. Good responses on things that were. So I think the idea of a freelance editor, if you can afford it and it's something that would really help with your confidence and your story, I think that's a good idea.
I also think the crowdsourcing and the Wattpad idea, like we have some articles on Pipeline Artists that Rami Mundi wrote, who is like a Wattpad success. Like and then Wattpad created their own publishing house, and she actually published through them. So it's, there's so many different ways in, and I think you're a great example of that. And I don't know, are you still in Portland?
No, I'm up in Olympia now. So
oh, okay.
About an hour north.
Yeah, there's another writer who's part of our Pipeline Artist contributors named Wake Brown, and she is in Portland, and she started off as a screenwriter, and now she's with an imprint of HarperCollins, and she's written a couple middle grade novels, and she has her first children's picture book coming out.
Oh,
So
that's great.
yeah, I'll have to introduce you. But there's a lot of screenwriters who have done this and successfully, and it, which I think is so cool. Julian had asked quite a while ago. I just want to make sure we get it in. I think when curious about the longest you've ever spent writing a screenplay or a novel. And I remember you said one of yours was like a year and a half.
Yeah, I would say, well, for first draft, I would say the first draft of my first book took me probably 2.5 to 3 years to write in its entirety before I hit the 160,000 word mark.
Mm-hmm.
Screenplays, I was actually in a pretty good habit of one a year for quite a while, and then of course rewriting and development time. So for screenplays, it was about a good year that I would spend on each one, which I know is not the best number, probably, if you want to make a career writing them a lot, but and novels just take me a lot longer.
But I feel like if you had that, like, how are you with deadlines?
I kind of like deadlines.
Yeah, I do too.
It's just that it's another one of those ending points for me to work towards. I get very, very stressed out when I'm not going to make them, though. I have spent multiple nights in a row not sleeping and writing instead until I was seeing things that weren't there. And then I get a rest and come back and read what I wrote. And it's like, wow, I don't know what this was. That wasn't anything worth my time. So they're a double-edged blade for me.
Did you use, like, do you do self-imposed deadlines? Like, a lot of people use contests as a way to create a self-imposed deadline to get something done.
Yeah, usually it's like, I want to get it done by this time because we're going to go out of town on a vacation after that, and I don't want to have to think about it. And so I'll try to hit that so then I can just detach from the project and enjoy my time for a bit.
Before I go on to this last couple questions, I'm looking, Deborah was grateful about your rejection advice. I was curious if you go on Goodreads and read your own reviews.
I absolutely do not, because I would obsess about it until I was in a funk so deep you could never pull me out. I would only see the bad ones.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I really, really like your advice about reading the reviews for the books you liked, and just to kind of as a check,
Yeah.
But I was curious about that, so I didn't want to forget.
I don't even have my Goodreads account linked with the book. I know you can become a Goodreads author and answer people's questions. I won't even do that because I know I'll get like a notification popping up. So-and-so gave you 1 star, and that'll just be the end of my day. So I just stay away from it.
That would be terrifying, because then you would want to just be like, what do you
Yep.
Someone with impulse control should definitely not do that.
Yep.
That's your tip for the day. Melanie said, my scripts always come from my original short stories, and that works for me, though of course I flesh out the story, character, etc. in the script. Have you done that as opposed to writing the stories after the script as you described? The written story acts as a pre-outline too. I think we kind of touched upon that, but I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add.
I can see how that would work. I've never done it that direction where I've adapted a short story or a book to screenplay. But I almost wonder if it would be harder trying to pick what to cut out of something longer than a screenplay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I mean, I've adapted a book into a script, and it's definitely hard. You got to lose a lot of stuff, and like if you tried to adapt the 115,000 word novel into a 2-hour screenplay. I can't imagine.
I mean, I can see now. It would probably look just like the original screenplay did, because everything I put in for the book I'd have to cut out.
Yeah, well, or you could, but that's the other thing I want to just ask. When you take your script and you adapt it into a book, and then because also too, people could be, if there's screenwriters listening, maybe you take a screenplay and you take that feature script and you blow it up into a limited series, and so you've made it longer. So whether it's a limited series or you adapt it into a novel, are there things that you've made a note of saying, you know what, if I'm going to go back to that script and never rewrite and touch that script again, this I'm going to put in it, because this little thing that is in the novel version should have been in the script too?
I have done that. I actually have a screenplay that's out with a director trying to get actors and producers attached right now. And he had gone dark for a while. The whole project had gone dark. And I was like, well, maybe I'll try this one for my Black Tide follow-up. And so I started writing it as a book. And then when the screenplay got steam again, I had started to look at it again with that different lens. And I was able to go back and flesh out things in ways that I hadn't thought of before when it was just a screenplay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what I think is cool. It's like that exploration of the story, and you're looking at it from a different vantage point, and all of a sudden, and with that freedom of being able to dive deeper and make it longer. And then sometimes you realize, yeah, I think there is a way I can put that in the screenplay and still keep it within that, 2-hour limit. And Melanie just clarified that her stories start as short stories, not as novels. So that makes it a little simpler. So we're going to wrap up with one final question actually 2 questions. One question, final question from Matt, and then one from me. Matt's final question. Would you adapt any of your previous scripts into books? Like, I think this is a hint, Horizon.
I dream about adapting that one. I think it might be too big of a story for me right now, just in terms of what I can get away with in the screenplay as far as firsthand knowledge of the setting and the world. For everybody who doesn't know, it takes place on a cruise ship, and I'm not a ship captain or don't really have a whole lot of experience in that world. I was able to write it in such a way that it was I was able to cheat my way around a lot of the details that for a novel I would want to know, like just firsthand have that experience. And it's just such a big story in that regard that I think I would need more time to polish my craft, hone my craft, and go get firsthand experience on the in the research for that project. I would love to, though. That would be a dream, because then once again I'd get to have more control over where it goes versus a TV show that, we know how that goes.
Yeah. I think that too, like as writers, it's like, it's the interesting part about what we do is, like, if you're a painter, you've painted something and it's up on the wall or, in a gallery, no one's going to buy it and then change it.
Right.
like they're going to appreciate it for what you created. And as writers, there's all these people touching, especially screenwriting, there's all these people touching it, and which is a little messed up.
It makes it kind of a unique art form in that way, that it stops being the individuals at a certain point and becomes everybody adjacent.
Yeah. And when I say messed up, I mean, it's obvious that that's how it has to be. Right. You're just one person in this huge collaborative team. But I think it's an interesting, you have to have a certain kind of personality for that, to be able to say, whatever, do whatever you want to do, you know? And, I worked on that for 5 years, but sure, change it.
I'm not sure I'm to that point yet.
So my final question I want to ask you is, if you could go back in time to your 18-year-old self and give yourself advice, it doesn't have to be advice about writing, be advice about life, whatever. What advice would you give yourself?
Boy.
This was therapy session. Did you copay?
I guess I would just tell myself to and in a way it's not even really that, it's kind of redundant advice because I did, but I would just say, make sure you don't give up. That road is very bumpy. It is very unpredictable, but it's one that you have to be able to persevere and get through those things, and don't be afraid to change, to pivot. I don't want to say that I regret any of my time screenwriting or that I feel like it was wasted time, but I do wish I had come to the idea of novels sooner. I feel like, I could have had a lot more years to be writing books, and maybe, I would just be in a different place with it than I am now, not just now getting started and trying to find my path forward. It would have been nice to have started this when I was 30.
Yeah. And have a nice little backlist of
Yeah.
books that passive income and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, I think, just from that practical perspective of novel writing, having that robust backlist is what gets you
Right.
the money, so to speak.
Yeah.
Just to be practical, but that is excellent advice, and, not giving up. And I think it's true for all art forms, whether you're screenwriting. But one thing about screenwriting, and you're saying not having regrets, I agree with you. And I think, all the work you did as a screenwriter, learning about story, learning about craft, learning about the business, all of that informed the storyteller you are today, and was experience. And I think there's, the reader now, they want, like, just like in screenwriting, best compliment, that was a fast read. A lot of people still want that in a novel. They want that. They want to sit down, flip the pages, and be totally engrossed. And I feel like as a screenwriter, you have that talent and that skill to grab them and not let them go, and I'm sure you bring all of that to your novels, which is invaluable. Probably
my favorite comments I get is that it reads like a movie. I think I wouldn't probably be writing it that way if I hadn't spent all those years writing movies. So it's, that's that whole no regrets thing.
Yep. Well, thank you so much, Casey. And everybody needs to go get black tied.
Please.
Please. We'll put a link to it. There should be a link to it on the site already with a promo for this session. But thank you, Casey. And keep us posted, and let's do this again. And next time we'll get the recording going right from the beginning, but we're still going to share what we have. But this was really wonderful and very inspiring. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. This isn't something I get to talk about very much. I really do live in a cave most of the time. So it's fun to come out and talk about the adventure.
Yeah. And when your next book is, I know you're working on it, you can't talk about it, but whenever you get to the point you can talk about it, we at Pipeline Artists, we have multiple podcasts. And I do one with Sadie Dean, who's the editor of Script Magazine, called Reckless Creatives. Matt does one with Michelle called, what is it called, Matt? The art. Oh God, he's going to kill me. Okay, Matt's going, wow. Put it in the chat.
Fast.
And How the Arts Were Won. Thank you. And Erica and Peter do this podcast, Needs a Title, which is dealing with the publishing space. And Chantal Amias Asman is an editor, and she does one for us called Words of Prey. So we have lots of podcasts for you to choose from, and would love to have you on when you can talk about that next book.
Oh, I'd love to. I'm excited. It's
cool.
With novels, you have the sophomore slump. With the second book, they would say the second book's hardest. And even though it's technically my third book, it's been a tough one. It's been a rockier road. I think that's for the better.
Yeah, but it's good. You got it. Yeah. You got it. Not worried about it. Well, thank you so much. And everybody have a great night.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.